Hello out there, and good morning, traders. It is December 18th, 2023, and welcome to the Apteros DMI, or Daily Market Insight, which is our pre-market prep for the session and recap of our previous DMIs. So let's dive into today's recap and planning and prep for the ES. Taking a look at our last DMI, which was from the 15th, we're going to be going over that particular plan, which had two lines in the sand, both bullish in nature, one lower and one higher. And we had multiple scenarios based on these two areas, but essentially we only needed scenario one, which was holding in a bullish posture up above this upper line in the sand. And, we pretty much were getting long all through this lower section here, looking for the release, and it just really never, the MFE from Friday, it was a pretty dull session, very rotational, never really pushed up to any of our upper contextual targets. We did get some intraday stuff. We did get some good MFE. We got good places to scale out along the way, especially around these highs. They were great areas for our intraday tools in terms of scaling and taking and locking in some profits. But overall, scenario one was all we really needed for the entire session because we really didn't break down below this line in the sand and hold below it and continue to push to the downside. Now, there was a section where, depending on how you define acceptance, this section here can be a little tricky for some traders to read. And it just comes down to that word acceptance. How do you define pushing beyond a line in the sand and holding? For me personally, what I do is I look at the chart that I'm using here for the prep. And this particular chart is a 5,000 volume chart. Okay. And what I look for is a leg of a rotation from high to low or low to high. So for example, this is a high to low. And I look for about the 50% mark there. And I want that 50% mark to clear the actual line in the sand. So for example, here from high to low, the 50% is about here. I want that 50% to be a little bit lower than my line in the sand, somewhere down in here, just call something accepted or having flipped in terms of a bias. Right here, it's considered what we call micro in the NADRO community. And micro things are a little bit more advanced. There's something that we explain a lot in our NADRO courses and something that we work with very frequently. And they require some extra tools to really go with or negate these type of holds. But the general rule that I use for acceptance is what I just described here. A leg of rhythm or a leg of a rotation from high to low or low to high, about 50% has to be through that line in the sand area for me to call it accepted. In this case here, you can see that 50% rate in the middle of my line in the sand, so I stick with the original bias or the scenario that's evolving in front of me, which was scenario one, and we get a nice rotation again back up into these areas here, just barely wicking the highs heading into the close for the day. So that is the general breakdown of what was going on there with our DMI and a little bit of extra commentary around understanding acceptance. Now, that particular word can have different meanings for different people depending on how you define it. I gave you an example of how I define it, but there are different ways we can do that within the NADRO course. And if you are a NADRO student, you definitely understand these concepts. All right, so let me understand and update our levels for today and break out our scenarios. Okay, so now I have updated our levels for today. Very similar plan to what we saw a lot of last week because we essentially have some time frames that are following this bullish behavior. So we have lower time frames that are a little bit more bullish in general up here at this upper line in the sand. Then we have some higher time frames that are a little bit more bullish in nature at the lower area. So what we're essentially looking at here is a bullish market across the board, and we're monitoring the way that evolves over different time frames. So for us today, what we're going to be looking at is an upper line in the sand, and we're going to be monitoring these neutral areas because they're going to be somewhat important for us in general whenever it comes to the nature in which this market is going to hold that bullish behavior or break it down. So looking at scenario one here, that's our current scenario. What we're seeing from this is a possible move to the upside. Now, for that to really have strong legs today, we need to see this upper neutral reference, this 47-48 area, clear out and hold, and that would give us a lot more of a bullish scenario for a continuation up into the 48.03s. If this upper neutral zone doesn't hold, it is very possible that we can rotate kind of back and forth between these references using this middle neutral reference as a possible zone for little trades like this with continuation to the upside. So in other words, what we're looking at here with scenario one from this line in the sand is holding bullish above that area. And what we're looking for in the early part of our session is a clearance and hold up above this 47.78 area for the further continuation to the upside. If that does not happen, in other words, if we don't see that clear and hold, then it's likely we're going to rotate back down into this zone here, and we're going to be looking at scenario 1 possibly holding and inflections coming up, and then continuations back up, and using these neutral areas as targets for scenario 1. So remember, scenario 1, line in the sand here, holding above that. Clearing out this neutral reference early in the session is what's important for us to see any kind of runaway market from this line in the sand. If not, the pullback is likely coming back in to test this zone. From there, we take a look at scenario 2, which is a breakdown of this line in the sand area. And this would be kind of a little bit more scalpy in the sense that we would get something like that as the opportunity right here. But it would be against the overall bias that we have been seeing for the last couple of weeks, especially trending with the ES market to the upside. So this, like I said, is a little bit more advanced, a little bit more like in your face and in the moment. So be cautious of scenario 2, but it is a possibility if this line in the sand breaks down. And that would be how scenario 2 would essentially be played out. Looking for that breakdown and then getting on board with the shorts heading down to our lower line in the sand there. Then from that, our lower line in the sand, this is kind of like where the main bullishness and the main idea of the bullishness is really tested. So we have scenario 3, which is a hold of that zone and a possible inflection to the upside. So we're looking for the move back up into the upper line in the sand, then a possible continuation along the way there. And then, of course, scenario 4 is a breakdown of that, and we have a target lower for that here. I'll show you that in just a second. But scenario 4 essentially is where the more clear change or shift for the bears would be if it occurs. And of course, scenario 4 having a little bit of a stretch target down here below, down in the 46.92 area, somewhere like that. Okay, so that is the general breakout of our different scenarios for today. Remember, our main line in the sand in our current scenario, the current what is this upper line in the sand and holding bullish above that. From there is where we have to start evaluating any changes or shifts in this market. And like I said, this upper neutral reference is going to be important for us to continue to the upside early in the session. If it fails, in other words, we start pulling back from here, we're going to be looking for this type of price action to be present early in the session and then possibly holding from our lower line in the sand area. All right, so that's the general plan and the way in which the laws of market dynamics could possibly play out for today. Trade well, mind your risk, and please have a great trading day.